This episode is part of Unspoken, a series of conversations about the thoughts, struggles, and feelings that many women carry but rarely feel safe enough to say out loud. This is Real Talk, Real Faith, Inside Soulful Sister Sanctuary. I am your host, Zaria Grace. This space is for grown women who love God, carry a lot on their shoulders, and are ready to live lighter. Here, we talk about why we feel the way we do and how to move with peace, clarity, and faith that feels steady. We're going to keep it real. We drop the mask and we lay it down so that God can lift it up. Take what fits, leave what doesn't, but don't ignore what hits. Now let's begin. There have been seasons in my life where I didn't need another Bible verse. I knew the promises of God and I knew what I was supposed to believe. But you know what I really needed? I needed someone to admit that sometimes having faith can be really, really hard. Because life can be terrifying at times. And there are moments when it feels like your head and your heart are having two completely different conversations. Your head knows that God is faithful, but your heart is panicking. Your head says that God will provide, but your heart wonders, but what if he doesn't? Your head says God has a plan, but your heart is whispering, but what if I make the wrong decision? And somewhere between the head and the heart, between what we believe and what we feel, is where most of us live. And maybe that's why you're here today. Maybe it's because you're carrying something that nobody else talks about. Maybe you've been waiting on an answer, or you're staring at a medical report or wondering if your marriage is going to make it. Maybe you're lying awake at 2 a.m. trying to solve a problem that has no clear solution. I don't think most of us are just struggling because we're not trusting God. I think we're struggling because we don't know what's going to happen next. And that can be scary. And I think that's a conversation that the church doesn't always know how to have. So today, we're going to have it. The honest version, the unpolished version, the unspoken version. I don't think the scariest question that we can ask is, can God do it? Because most of us know that, yes, he is able. But I think the scarier question is, what if he doesn't? What if it doesn't work? What if the door never opens? What if the answer takes longer than I expected? We don't talk about those questions very often, but they're real. And I think most of us ask them more than we'd probably be willing to admit that we do. I think many of us started believing at some point that if we really trusted God, that we would never feel this afraid. So when those questions just naturally come up in your head, we don't get curious about them. We get concerned. We start wondering, something wrong with me? Why am I thinking like this? Am I not trusting God? I should be able to handle this better. But that's not the faith that I see in Scripture. And it's certainly not the faith that I've experienced in real life. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about faith is that faith and certainty are the same thing. But they're not. I personally don't think they're nearly as connected as we even think that they are. Because most of us aren't actually looking for faith. We want security. We want guarantees. We want certainty. Lord, I need to know how this relationship is going to work. I need to know if this door is going to open. Lord, I need to know if I'm making the right decision. We want to know for sure that God is going to answer the prayer this way. And sometimes when we can't find that certainty, that's when we start questioning ourselves. Am I not trusting enough? Did I miss God? Am I just making the wrong decision? But what if faith was never supposed to feel certain? Think about it for a second. If you already knew how everything was going to turn out, if you knew how the decision was going to work out to a T, if you knew exactly what God was going to do every time he moved, faith wouldn't be necessary. Faith only becomes necessary when certainty isn't available. Because faith exists in the space between what we know and what we don't. And I think that's the part that can feel frustrating, because many of us have spent years chasing a feeling that God never promised. Certainty. We tell ourselves, when I know what to do, I'll have peace. When I get the answers, I'll have peace. When things settle down, I'll have peace. But oddly enough, there's going to be another decision, another season, another thing that we didn't see coming. And if our peace depends on certainty, we are going to spend our entire life chasing something that we'll never quite catch. And maybe that's why so many of us are exhausted. We're trying to carry things that we were never meant to carry. Trying to know what only God knows. Trying to control what we were never meant to control. We're trying to find guarantees where none were promised. And that's a heavy way to live. No wonder why so many of us are tired. Because when we're exhausted, that fear sounds louder. And I think that's where a lot of people may get stuck. What if the goal isn't that we just stop feeling afraid? But what if the goal is to stop allowing fear to make decisions for us? Fear can sound really persuasive because it sounds practical. It sounds wise. Fear can sound like, well, I'll just wait a little longer. I really do need to do more research. Don't get your hopes up. I need to protect myself. I'm not going to take the risk. And sometimes those things are wise. But then there are other times when fear is simply just wearing wisdom's clothing. Sometimes fear isn't protecting us. It is preventing us from living. It's preventing us from trusting and growing and stepping into the things that God may be calling us towards. And the reason fear has so much power is because it rarely attacks our circumstances. It attacks our identity. There are so many women who I don't think are actually afraid of failure, but they're afraid failure will confirm something that they already feel about themselves. They may be thinking, what if I'm not enough? What if I fall apart? What if this breaks me? And I think that's where faith becomes so personal. Because faith isn't just asking, do I trust God? Sometimes faith is really asking, do I trust that God will sustain me if the thing that I'm afraid of actually happens? I don't think a lot of us are afraid of uncertainty. Sometimes I think we're just afraid of the pain. We don't want it to hurt. God, please don't let me be disappointed. Please don't let me walk through that. And maybe that's why fear feels so hard. Because we're trying to trust God while simultaneously negotiating our way around the pain. And most of the time, we don't even realize that we're actually even doing it. But faith was never a promise that life would be painless. Faith was the promise that we will never walk through pain alone. And maybe that's why faith and fear can feel so uncomfortable together. Because faith requires surrender, and fear hates surrender. Fear says, I need to know. Faith says, move anyway. Fear says, just show me the whole path. But faith says, I'll just take the first next step. I don't think that fear is always the opposite of faith either. Sometimes control is, because control says, I'll trust once I have enough information. But faith, it says something different. It says, I'll trust even when I don't. That was the realization that changed the way that I viewed fear. What if faith isn't confidence that everything is going to work out just exactly the way that I want it to? But what if faith is just the confidence that no matter what, that God will meet me there? Those are not the same thing. One places peace on the outcome, and the other places peace in God's presence. And those are two very different places to build a life. I often think about the story of Peter in the Bible. I wonder if we're focusing on the wrong part of the story. Many people just remember Peter sinking, but that's just not the part that stands out to me anymore. What stands out to me is that he got out of the boat. 11 disciples stayed where it felt safe, but Peter stepped into uncertainty. He stepped into something that he could not control. Yes, he sank, but he got to experience something that the others never experienced. He got the opportunity to walk on water. I think that sometimes we're so afraid of sinking that we never step out of the boat. We're so afraid of disappointment that we never allow ourselves to even hope. We're so afraid of failure that we never give ourselves an opportunity to even try. Faith isn't about never sinking. Faith is about being willing to step out anyway and trusting that no matter what, the Almighty God will always meet you there. So let me leave you with a question today. Where has fear been making all the decisions in your life? Not where are you afraid, but where is fear driving? Is it driving in your relationships, in your career, in your boundaries, in your calling, in your future? Fear will gladly take the wheel if we allow it to. And I think that's a lesson that I even had to learn. Faith is not the absence of fear. It's the decision that fear does not get the final say. I think sometimes most of us are waiting for fear to leave. We're waiting to feel ready. We're still waiting to feel confident or certain. But Peter didn't step out the boat when he felt certain. He stepped out while the storm was still raging. And maybe that's why his story matters. Because the miracle wasn't that Peter walked on water. The miracle was that he was willing to step out. So if you're waiting to feel fearless before you take the next step, you may be waiting forever. The invitation isn't to become fearless. The invitation is to trust God enough to move anyway. The absence of fear has never been the evidence of faith. The willingness to keep moving has. If this episode encouraged you, I would love for you to follow the podcast, leave a review, or share it with another woman who may need this reminder today. Now, before you go, unclench your jaw, drop your shoulders, and take one slow, delicious breath in and out. You have carried enough for today. God never asked you to be everything for everyone. You are allowed to rest, you are allowed to say no, and you are allowed to be cared for. Strong doesn't mean silent, and burnout is not holy. Let's lay it down so that God can lift it up, and I will see you inside the sanctuary.